Muy buenas tardes a todos en vísperas de Navidad. Sean todos bienvenidos. Vamos a continuar con la serie de seminarios que hemos hecho en los últimos tiempos dedicados a temas que tienen que ver con la Constitución. Este seminario de hoy está asociado al problema del contrato social. Les recuerdo que hemos tenido en la serie de están todos en la página web de Lexen Constitución 2022.cl. Hemos tenido ya dos seminarios anteriores sobre el problema del contrato social. En el primero de ellos habló Nora Lustig de la Universidad de Tulane y ella habló básicamente de las desigualdades y el contrato social. En el segundo de esos seminarios habló el profesor Gösta Sping Andersen sobre el problema del estado de bienestar y el contrato social. Y hoy día tenemos el placer de tener con nosotros a Olivier Boin y Marc Fleurbet, eh, que nos van a hablar de un proyecto muy grande que se llama el Manifesto por el Progreso Social. Pero quien va a moderar esta sesión, porque yo voy a ser comentarista, quien va a moderar es Jimena Clark. Jimena, ustedes probablemente la conocen dentro de sus múltiples facetas. Hoy día es profesora de la Facultad de Economía y Negocios de la Universidad de Chile, pero en el pasado ustedes la habrán visto seguramente como la directora del Instituto Nacional de Estadística, entre otras ocupaciones. Ella tiene un doctorado en economía en Boston University y es economista de la Universidad de Concepción, Jimena, si no me equivoco. Eh, entonces, Jimena, te doy la palabra.
un- una maestría en economía, no un doctorado. Bueno, a ver, entonces vamos a iniciar la presentación. Vamos a tener primero la presentación de Olivier Drouin, y luego vamos a continuar con Marc Fleurbet. Ambos son, digamos, autores del Manifesto, el libro Manifesto para el contrato, progreso social, ideas para una mejor sociedad, ¿no? La presentación va a ser en inglés en todo caso, y creo que tienen abajo la instrucción para seguir la presentación en inglés, ¿no? Eh, Sin más, déjenme un segundo. Eh, Guillermo, tal vez tú quieres hacer la presentación de cada uno de los autores. Tenía el artículo aquí, pero lo tengo, justo se cerró el archivo.
Sí. Mire, sí, Marc Fleurbet es economista, fue profesor mucho tiempo en la Universidad de Princeton, pero hoy día está de vuelta en París. Ambos son franceses. Está en la Paris School of Economics o Escuela de Economía de París. Tiene una muy larga trayectoria académica con enorme cantidad de publicaciones en temas básicamente que tienen que ver con relacionados con el contrato social. Sería largo leerlas todas, pero es uno de los líderes, el líder de este proyecto tan grande que abarcó a más de 300 personas, incluyendo un chileno, que es Javier Couso, que además de gran amigo mío, es miembro del comité asesor del EXEN, así que saludamos a Javier a la distancia. Ustedes lo van a ver en una foto, está escondido ahí arriba en la foto que van a ver enseguida. Por otra parte, Olivier Boin es también economista y es el director del Réseau Français de Institut de Haute Étude Avancée. Voilà. El de la red francesa de institutos de altos estudios, y ha tenido también una carrera sumamente destacada, entre otras cosas, por ejemplo, coeditor de un libro interesante con alguien que en Chile es muy querido, como Manuel Castells, y que se llamaba Las crisis de Europa. Ambos entonces tenemos juntos son dinamita, se dice en español, juntos son dinamita. Entonces, dos grandes intelectuales que nos van a ayudar a entender un poco mejor, no necesariamente el caso chileno, pero el caso mundial y europeo fundamentalmente, de qué está pasando con el contrato social en el mundo. Entonces, Olivier.
Sí.
tengo que hablar en inglés. So I will share my screen. If everything goes well, you should be at some point seeing this. Okay, can you see this? Jimena, can you see the screen? Okay, so my name is Olivier Boin, as Guillermo said, and Jimena, and we're very glad with my friend and colleague Marc to have a chance to address what's currently developing in Chile with this constituent movement, and we I'm French, and I'm the head not only of this network of Institute for Advanced Studies in France and in Europe, but also I'm the president of the European Alliance for Social Sciences and Humanities. And with Marc, we kind of started a big project that was not meant to be big at the beginning. It was something that we thought would be kind of a collaborative project where we wanted to launch, to take stock of the progress of social sciences knowledge over the past quarter century on the long-term vision on societies. So it was mostly, the idea was to gather economists, political scientists, sociologists, philosophers, law scholars, anthropologists to get together and try to harness the knowledge that has been produced over the past quarter century in social sciences and humanities, and try to figure out how we could contribute and synthesize some of the knowledge that has been produced to provide a kind of a long-term vision on societies, and to contribute possibly to the public debate on the options for the betterment of societies in the 21st century. So this started as, the starting point was that Marc and a few other colleagues were part of the International Panel on Climate Change, or the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC. And we, at some point, we also figured out that there was an international panel on biodiversity, on chemical pollution, on nuclear proliferation. There were a lot of international panels, but nothing on the long-term vision on societies. So we decided, why don't we start something that would be a kind of international panel? And at the beginning, to play with the acronym IPCC, we wanted to do IPSC, which was the International Panel on Social Change. And then we discuss with a small group of 10 to 15 scholars, and we say, well, climate change is a problem. Social change is not a problem per se. So we would need to look at a compass for societies. And so we decided to progress could have been social justice. But we thought that for the 21st century, it was kind of interesting to have a kind of long perspective and to focus on this idea of progress. And basically, this is a project that has grown. You have like a picture of the group of colleagues that have been involved. It was like a meeting in Istanbul back in 2017. At the end, we had more than 300 scholars from all SSH disciplines and from all continents, i.e. not only, I would say, the usual suspects of Western Europe and North America, but really scattered. And Nora Lustig, that Guillermo mentioned as the first speaker in your cycle of webinars, was a member and still is a member of the International Panel on Social Progress. So we had people coming from Latin America, from the Middle East, Africa, Asia, and the idea was to have kind of a global perspective and to look at trends and to look at the opportunities, but also the big challenges that were looming in the 21st century and that could really impact the progress of societies. So basically, what we did over this 4-year program or project was to really take stock of the literature that's been produced, to look at the points of agreement and the points of disagreement among scholars, and it's a totally independent panel. We were not funded by a government, or it was not intergovernmental. It was an initiative led by scholars and with scholars, and also with external contribution from social actors, but mostly an academic panel that was scholarly driven. And we decided to focus on three main domains. The first one is about socio-economic transformation and inequalities. The second one is about the rule of law, democracy, and governance. And the third one is about cultures, values, and identities. So really kind of wide coverage of the issue of social progress. And we really very much wanted to include a third chapter that would not deal only with socio-economic problems and I would say political science and law problems, but also to include cultures, values, and identities that most often left aside in this big picture of societies when we have a look at trends, opportunities, and challenges. So basically, we have produced 3 volumes called Rethinking Societies for the 21st Century. So it was published by Cambridge University Press in 2018. So these are 3 thick volumes. Altogether, it's more than 1,200 pages. Obviously, when you have a look at the production, the scholarly production over the past quarter century on such a large, I would say, issue, and with all the big themes and words and concepts related to that, you need to have rather a large, I would say, overview of the literature. And then a subgroup, 6 colleagues led by Marc, and with 4 other colleagues, we decided to have like not a Reader's Digest, but a kind of a short version, a short essay that we called a Manifesto for Social Progress, Ideas for a Better Society, and that was translated subsequently in 7 languages: French, Spanish, recently by a Mexican publishing house, but we have also in Dutch, in Swedish, in Arabic, in Chinese. So all this is developing rather interestingly. And all the contents, and I stress that, all the contents are available online on ipsp.org. So if you want to find references and go further on the three volumes and everything, you have most of these contents available online. And I should add, there is also a documentary that was shot during the process of discussing and producing the reports and the manifesto. And you will find the link on this documentary on the website. So basically what we've been doing, and I will end my presentation after a few slides, and Marc will introduce what are I would say, the conclusions or the remarks or suggestions that we can draw from our work over the past 4 or 5 years that could be helpful or interesting for the discussion in the Chilean case. So what we've been doing is assessing the situation, and we've seen a lot of opportunities, and we've seen a lot of positive changes over the past 50 years around the world. But also what we've seen is the development of many challenges that pose major threats to societal cohesion, to social progress. And we decided to kind of cluster them on the 3 main headers. The first one is about inequalities. If we've seen less inequalities across countries or between countries, you have more inequalities within countries, and this is a very worrying trend. We've seen some adverse impact of technology on the fate of social classes, and this is something that has had a kind of an adverse impact also on the cohesion of societies. The second cluster is about environmental degradation, the changing climate, the reduction in biodiversity, the increase in all sorts of pollutions and air pollutions. And this is a major, obviously, challenge for societies and at the national or local, national or global level, and also governance crisis, with a rise in the distrust in institutions, in public institutions, a rise in distrust in democracy in many corners of the world. We have like a lot of discussion on this, but also you have a rise of populism and nationalism in many countries. And all this has produced challenges that we need to take into account for, obviously, the long-term vision on societies. But the most important, I think, thing is that it's the first time that we have to deal with the three main challenges at one time. And it's a kind of a conjunction of challenges that was exacerbated by COVID-19. We kind of recently put together an article on how COVID-19 has not changed the situation, has just worsened the situation especially on inequalities and in some cases on governance crisis. But this is the first time that societies at various levels of governance are facing these three challenges, and it's a kind of unique challenge that our societies are facing today. So what we've been trying to show that these three challenges, or these three main challenges, inequalities, environmental change, and the distrust in institutions, are really interrelated. Obviously, that's when you speak about the Sustainable Development Goals. You have this map of 17 goals that, but the most important message, or one of the most important message of the panel, is that these challenges are interrelated. They are linked. They are interconnected, and you cannot focus on inequalities and not dealing with environmental degradation or distress in public institutions, but at the same time, you cannot work on environmental climate change and then not look at the impact of these policies or combating environmental degradation, on inequalities, and on the dynamics of public institutions. So all these, and it was one of the, I would say, major message that we wanted to send, is that this is a unique situation or unique configuration of challenges, and these challenges are very well, I would say, interconnected. And what I will leave now, Marc, continue with what could be helpful for establishing a new social contract. And I will end by saying that basically we had, and Marc will develop that now, we have tried to identify existing solutions, not necessarily to wait for kind of a revolutionary grand soir, but to look at the solutions, the existing solutions that have already been tested somewhere on the globe and then have been helpful in trying to solve some of these challenges. And the message was that there was not a unique solution. There was not one path. There are many alternatives. And the second big message was about the dynamics of change. Who would be the actors of this change? And I think in the case of Chile, we basically figured out that there was a kind of coalition of actors that would need to play together in order to make things happen. But now, Marc, I leave you the floor, and I will be the one just moving from one slide to the other. Thank you. Marc?
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, so thank you, Olivier, and thank you, the organizers, for being part of this important conversation you have about the new social contract. So, Olivier, it looks like your slides are no longer shared, so maybe I'll share my own slide.
I think the organizers
I'll do it.
unshared my screen.
Yeah. Yes, that's fine. Let me do it. Yeah. Okay, and we were here. You see the slide? Now you're showing that, yes?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, good. So Olivier has highlighted the three main challenges that we are facing at this critical historical juncture. And the key message regarding these challenges is that we cannot neglect any of them, right? So it's a daunting task. We have to address all of them together. And in a way, what you are starting to do in Chile is attacking with the constitution issue, is attacking perhaps the paramount challenge, which is the governance challenge, right? So everything somehow starts there. Everything is interrelated. So let me notions. So a key notion that was mentioned, that was shouted by people in Chile was dignity, a big call for dignity and sharing dignity among all. And I think this is indeed something that resonates very much with the work of our group. And one thing I'd like to stress is that dignity is not just about reducing inequalities in resources, but it's also about things which have more to do with status and power, with the quality of social relations. So it has to do with sharing status and making sure that everybody feels included, and also building participatory mechanisms for decision making, giving everyone a sense of control over one's life. And in the context of Chile, you come from a very market-oriented economy, and you may wonder if promoting dignity along these three dimensions, resources, inclusion, and control, whether that is compatible with the market economy. So our work suggests that yes, market economy is somehow something that we have to work with, but we need to tame the market economy, to make it work for social progress and to serve human well-being. And that includes both making sure that we have fairness, safeguards in the functioning of the market economy in the three dimensions, not just resources, but also inclusion, so avoiding discrimination and control. And I will come back to that about sharing power in the economy as well. And also, beside fairness, we have to, the economic agents behave responsibly, right? And really take account of their social and environmental impacts in general. So the key transformations that I would like to mention here, we think are about three core institutions. So the welfare state, and you've already heard from Esping Anderson about that, but I'll just highlight a few things. Capitalism and the market economy, I'll come back to that, and politics, the political institutions. So let me briefly review these main things. So regarding the welfare state, in fact, somehow we would like to change its function and to change its label as well. So instead of being just a welfare state, the function of the state should be to emancipate everyone, right? So it should become something that is not just about protecting people, but really about liberating them. And this requires putting together three philosophies of the welfare state, which are somewhat different, sometimes in competition, but that need actually to be mobilized, all of them at the same time. So the old-fashioned welfare state is about somehow rescuing the losers of the market competition through taxes and transfers, the usual redistributive mechanisms. So that cannot be abandoned, it has to remain there. But there is another dimension which has been proposed in particular by the advocates of the third way, for instance, in the UK at some point, and which is about preparing people for their role in the market economy, somehow for the market competition. And this has to do with investment in human capital, so education and healthcare are key in this dimension. So this is something that is also not rejected. But our main point, perhaps, is that if we want the welfare state to become really an emancipatory state, it has to consider to include the third dimension, which is to really change the rules of the game itself, so that the market economy is not as destructive, as inhuman, as harsh on people as it can be otherwise, right? So making sure that the market is fair and responsible is part of this idea of changing the rules of the game. And I would like to mention something that's relevant for many countries, and that includes Chile. Patriarchy in the family and in close circles of relationship, that is also something that is very problematic. So working toward ending patriarchy is another way in which the rules of the game can change to great effect. One thing I'd like to mention about the state is that, as specialists say, universal rules and services and ways of organizing the relation between the state and citizens are much better in general, if it's possible, if it's affordable, than targeted measures. Because targeted measures tend to separate the people who are targeted, whereas universal measures are better for inclusion, so there is no stigma. It's also better for building trust in the institutions and political buy-in, because everybody stands to benefit from universal measures, whereas targeted measures are usually considered to be addressed to a minority. So let me talk a little bit about reforming capitalism. So I already mentioned this idea of having a fair market. So the key institution in capitalism is actually not so much the market, surprisingly, it's the corporation. So the most of the economic activities and production especially are done in firms, and that's where not only the economy is really being built, but also people's social status, people's social standing is being built through not just the income they earn, but also through their professional status and the power relations they enjoy in their work. So reforming the workplace is absolutely essential, and that requires reforming the corporation in three ways. So it's in particular about changing the mission of the corporation. So it's not just about shareholder value, something that has been very popular since Milton Friedman's influential plea in this respect. But now we have to include all stakeholders. So the stakeholder value should be the new mantra. And beyond that, because we have to take account of the impact, including on the environment in many ways, and future generations. So it has to be a really broad circle of responsibility. It's not just the mission that has to be changed, but also the governance of the firms to make it more inclusive, participatory. And of course, that goes in tandem with changing, making the stakeholders not just part of the mission, but also part of the governance of the firm. And finally, reporting has to be adjusted so that the firm is much more aware and transparent about its impacts on shareholders and beyond, right? So this is a key, really a key reform, which of course is hard to do on a local basis, but a lot of initiatives have been observed and a sort of inner movement already happening in the business world. For instance, with the creation of the benefit corporations, the so-called B Corps, and all these things are initiatives which can build a movement, but we need public policies that buttress, that support this movement, and somehow force all firms, not just the few good-willed firms and business leaders, but all firms to become more responsible. I'd like to briefly mention, of course, about the fair market. Fair competition is something that is important. There is too much market power in many economies, and especially in Latin America, many economies are really built around monopolies and crony capitalism. So this is a key issue. And we have to recognize that competition, which is celebrated by most economists, and Olivier and I are economists, but competition has a dark side, which is that it somehow rewards the less scrupulous of the actors, right? So those who externalize the maximum of their cost can win the competition. And so that's where the reform of the corporation has to be built in guidelines and safeguards in competition, in the market competition, so that the responsible business leaders and firms can survive and not be undermined by less scrupulous players. Transparency is also something that can help a lot in promoting ethical consumption and ethical investment. When you know where you put your money and you know the consequences on society, that can be very helpful. And this is something that can be done by really promoting information given to the various actors. And finally, as I said, we already see a lot of innovations, and so we need to encourage that. So it's not just about economic innovation, which is good for essentially fighting the monopolies and the established interests, but also social innovation. It's important not to bet on just one form of, for instance, of cooperation. Different forms of responsible corporations can coexist together. And so we need to be open to to new ideas in this respect. Okay, let me, after the welfare state and capitalism, let me discuss the question of politics, right, the political sphere. So here, we know that democracies are endangered more or less everywhere in the world, but it's important to think in terms of, it's not as if you had democracy somewhere and the total absence of democracy elsewhere. In fact, democracy is imperfect everywhere and needs to be deepened if it can survive and thrive. And so there is a big consensus in our group about the value of enhancing participation and deliberation. So democracy is not just a competition between parties and candidates. It's much deeper than that. It has to involve all the people who are affected by the decisions that are taken. And so participatory mechanisms are really key. And interestingly, Latin America has been one of the labs for innovation in this respect. So it's absolutely fascinating that it started there and now it's spreading all over the world. That is really, really encouraging. A few other points I'd like to mention briefly. The media system, and I include there the internet platforms and social media, has to be treated not as a business like any other business. It has to be treated as a common good. And I say that it doesn't mean it has to be a public thing led by the government or completely monitored by the government. It has to be treated as a common good for all of society, right? And so we cannot trust either private businesses or even governments to do that correctly. It really needs to be checked by all of society. Reforming electoral rules is something that can be discussed, and Constitution moment is the moment where this can be discussed. So you are very lucky in Chile. You have a window of opportunity to discuss that. Once electoral rules are in place, it's very hard to change them. So be careful there. You can really borrow ideas from all the work that is done by the specialists of voting mechanisms and the various aspects of the electoral system. There are many good ideas and new ideas keep coming up. So this is a good source of inspiration. The influence of money in democracies is sometimes very visible, sometimes less visible, but is essentially rampant everywhere. And this is a problem. So this is part of the story of treating the democracy as a common good, right? We need to really, of course, we need money to make things happen in the electoral system and all that. But it needs to be transparent and it needs to be controlled so that special interests cannot capture the whole process. And there, something that is quite interesting is that there is also a consensus about the importance of civil society. So civil society is something that, all associations of all sorts that can play a role in pushing for various reforms or to check or to play the role of whistleblowers in various situations. So civil society is something that should not just be left to the spontaneous initiative of citizens. It should be something that has a real institutional place in the system. So it's very important to try to give a specific role to it. And then actually, including in Latin America, certain experiments of this sort, for instance, for the governance of the internet in Brazil and in various other countries. So there are things like that that have happened already. So giving an institutional role to civil society is something that can be very important. So I'll conclude just now in order to leave time for discussion with a few remarks about how this can be done. So obviously, if we are talking about a society which is much more participatory than the situation we have in most societies today, it's very unlikely that this could come from a top-down initiative. It's probably something that can emerge from a bottom-up transformation. And of course, we have essentially three levels of structures for society: the constitutional level, fundamental law, the ordinary legislative level, the laws and regulation, and as I already mentioned, popular pressure and the role of civil society. But in fact, the bottom-up initiative can happen at all these levels. So there have been experiments, for instance, in Iceland, with constitution being a participatory mechanism. And what you are doing in Chile seems very interesting also in this respect, because you had you consulted people about how to populate the assembly that is designing the constitution. So all of that is extremely important and can reflect a bottom-up initiative as well. And similarly, if you have participatory mechanisms, you can have laws and regulations that are shaped by a bottom-up initiative and mini-publics and citizen assemblies and these things, right? So we can really have bottom-up movements at all these levels, at all these structures of society. In our big report, there is a chapter that discusses the moral compass of the social contract of a better society. And the authors have interestingly given a list of the values, a quite exhaustive list of the values that can inspire both the evaluation of social situations, so the decisions we can make for the collective, but also the actions that we can implement. And so this summary of their list is quite interesting to look at. So dignity is actually quite prominent in their list, which resonates very much with the Chilean people. Freedom and non-alienation, security. So you have certain basic things, respect of pluralism, for the environment, and also things which are more perhaps in terms of the quality of social relations. So benevolence, tolerance, and the esteem and recognition to be largely shared among people. On the right-hand side, you see principles for collective actions, which are somehow more standard and have to do with basic principles for institutions, right? And that includes democracy and distributive justice, but also things like civic education, because people need to be not just trained for their professional life, but also for their role as citizens. And this is extremely important. So education has a key role to play in this context. And transparency, already mentioned, can play a role in many ways, including in the economy to guide ethical behavior and so on. This is the last slide. I'd like to discuss a little bit. Sometimes people ask, what can be done given the global interdependence we have? Isn't it a source of despair because not much can be done at the local level? This is actually not true, because even in one's own family, one can start a sort of bubble of social justice by ending patriarchy in the family and making efforts in all ways, right? Similarly, a business can start responsible behavior and including stakeholders, so you can have a lot of fairness and social justice in a business. And so the same at the regional level and the same in a country and so on. So a lot can be done actually at the local level if you try to implement the principles that have been discussed here. But of course, we shouldn't be naive. And the globalization, sometimes called the hyper-globalization that we have observed, now it's receding a little bit. And perhaps that can be helpful for local initiative. But we need to address the global challenges at the global level as much as possible. So it's not very original to say that. So we need intergovernmental coordination and cooperation. But what I wanted to stress, which is perhaps an interesting development in the last decade, is that we can also see global coordination for other actors than government. And we can have jurisdictions, cities, and at various levels, and also NGOs, unions, various associations. They can build global coalitions, including, so we give examples in our report and our book of things happening. For instance, the informal workers, the poorest workers in South Asia are part of a global coalition based around a network of NGOs. So this kind of initiative is extremely promising because it gives them much more clout, including in global arenas like the UN and this sort of settings. So global coordination is important, but starting local and using the initiative of various actors, not just the governments at the global level, can be very important and promising. So thank you very much for your attention, and of course feel free to write to us if you have anything. But we look forward to the discussion now.
Thank you so much, Marc and Olivier. there are many things that are very appropriate for the discussion in Chile. But before going to that, Guillermo would like to comment also on your work.
And before that, al público asistente,
Yes.
les comento que pueden hacer preguntas en el chat, de manera que las podemos, o la escriben en inglés como quieran, o en español, la traduce aquí Jimena, no hay problema, o yo. Well, I'm really glad to have you here because reading this book is very refreshing. We are basically suffering the same kind of problems in Chile as the ones you mentioned in the book. And I asked Mark on last Friday if we could talk about dignity, in particular dignity, because I have the feeling dignity was one of the slogans that was most reproduced during the social explosion. The total slogan was "Until dignity becomes a reality." That was the slogan, and it was
Ese fue el
everywhere.
eslogan.
And I don't think we have an enough understanding of what dignity means. And I really love the idea that is proposed in the book, and it was clear in Marx's presentation, basically saying that dignity has these three dimensions, which is participation, which is more or less clear in the case of Chile. We know that we need to increase participation for dignity reasons. Inclusion, which is not surprising. But you mentioned the third one, I think, which is very relevant, I think, for us, which is control. And control is underestimated, I think, as a value. And I really love that because it opens the way to think, how can we, what should we be looking for? So it's sure that we should be looking for more participation, that's clear. We should be looking for more inclusion, but we also should be looking for more control. We need to give instruments for the people to feel that they are in control of their lives. It's true that this unbalanced globalization, the kind of unbounded reign of economic forces and financial laws gave the impression that we had lost control of everything. So we need to regain control without losing the good things of globalization. And this is very nice, the last slide you have, because one good thing of globalization is precisely this act in which we are now. So we are thinking global here. We have two distinguished French academies, and we want to act local. So how can we promote the enhanced control of our lives without losing the good part of being in exchange with other people, which necessarily will affect our lives just because they have ideas that may be more powerful than ours, or because in economic terms, there are firms which are stronger than our firms. So I believe this is a debate, and I think, but the concept of control was very illuminating for me. A second element that I would like to highlight from the presentation is that to some extent you are you're proclaiming a reconciliation between the welfare state or the emancipatory state with capitalism. This is something that I fully believe in. That I showed Mark my first book. I will show it here. My first book, which is called Chile Fértil Provincia, hacia un Estado liberador y un mercado revolucionario. This is the kind of thing that I've been thinking about since 2005 at least. And I really believe that this is the way forward. We need to reconcile a state that has powerful instruments in order to introduce welfare. More, I like the change in the word from welfare to emancipatory state. I like that, which is very, very, very important, I think. And we need to rethink that in Chile, you know, the reforms in the 1980 basically transferred to the private sector the welfare state, basically, under market mechanisms, and they obtained some things, but and this has to do with the control issue. We transferred a lot, many risks that were borne by the state in the past that were transferred to the society. Some of those risks are reasonable because you want to introduce, if you want, incentives for good behavior, participation, contribution to the public good in terms of, for example, in pensions, etc. But there are many risks which are totally out of control of people, which to some extent enhance this idea of, well, control, I just said. For example, longevity risk in pensions. We are not capable of managing this. We all want to live one day more if we can. So longevity risk is a risk that is out of our control. It's not our, and we pay, to one extent, personally, we pay the cost of that. We don't socialize that in any way. Now, concerning this, there is this other idea that it's in the book about universalization of benefits. And here I have some questions for you, because you have two types of problems. In emerging markets, in the case of Chile, for example, you have a very low tax base for financing those universal benefits. And many people really don't believe that that is feasible at all. Many people don't believe that that universal benefits will discourage incentives. And so what are your views on this sort of trade-off, universalization vis-a-vis the effort that people need to make in order to contribute? And how can you create a tax base, a solid tax base that may finance all these things? That's one question. One element that I didn't, well, it's on the book, more or less spread all over the text, but in the presentation it wasn't clear. I believe it's very important in the governance of, in reforming capitalism, which is very important for a business school such as ours. We are an economics and business school, so for us this is very important. In terms of governance, the importance of diversity. When I think about diversity, I think like when you are in a submarine, and you need to have many different instruments in order to understand what the submarine is. You cannot have just one instrument. You cannot have just the periscope, because when you are very down in the water, you need other instruments. You need sonars. You need, I don't know what other instruments, radars, and I don't know what else. But the point is that diversity is necessary for the safety of the submarine. And the same, diversity is necessary for the safety of the firm, because firms need to have different approaches to their context. And I believe that in reforming diversity, in reforming capitalism, that was something that was lacking. And I didn't saw this in the book, but you mentioned it here in the presentation. I would like if you can reflect, both of you, on this. What do you mean by media system as a common good? In deepened democracy, we fully agree with this. Our constituent process will probably go very, very far on this, at least I hope. But what do you mean by the media system as a common good? We don't have in the region very good examples of this. The Kirchner government in Argentina tried to force the sale of some media companies. In Venezuela, we have seen also that Maduro government, and even Chavez as well, nationalized private. So what do you mean exactly by that? It's an interesting thing that you could eventually add to this very valuable presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Guillermo. Shall we answer now, or Ximena?
Yes, but I just would like to add to the last question of Guillermo the following. Basically, he was referring to situations where you have government interference, but you could also have, say, a kind of private interference in the sense that the ownership is very concentrated, which is the case of Chile, for instance. So I would add that. And then I have another question also that I'm going to say it now, which is, you talk a lot about the providing more participatory right to civil society in order to have a better system of deliberation, and all of this would deepen the democracy, right? And there is also the importance of those who make the change drivers at the end. But when you have a society in which you have a high level of, which is highly polarized, and also which has a huge problem of legitimacy, there is a very low trust level on every type of institution, say the parliament, the government, the private sector. The question is, how do you construct this institutional participation of civil society, and you do not end just by small group of people working for very legitimate issues, but that at the end of the day facing a big coordination problem also, and just addressing very local problem and not the global ones. So I leave with that at the moment.
So if you wish, I can start, and Olivier will supplement, especially perhaps for the last question, Olivier, right? So on universal benefits, yes, you're absolutely right, Guillermo. This is a challenge for emerging economies where the tax base doesn't enable the government to fund large services for everyone. But there are two things I'd like to mention. So I don't have a magic recipe for that, and it's a matter of building up things, right? Please remember that when the Scandinavian countries started their very ambitious welfare state, they started progressively, and they were, I bet, no richer than Chile is now. Maybe so that is, I think, a good reason for hope. And actually, emerging economies can do a lot already. But it's true that the low tax base, and especially in some countries, I'm not sure Chile is very much in that sphere, but in many countries, the informal sector is extremely important, and that is a serious problem for the tax base. The things I would like to say is that investing in human capital is extremely profitable. So it may look like it's an expense at some point, but if you make a computation over the long run, it's actually extremely profitable. And so this is the kind of computation that needs to be made carefully. There is a problem of transition, right? So you need to fund the investment in an initial period, and so the first generation benefiting from that needs to become productive to really repay this investment. So it takes time, and this may be a financial problem, but it's really, so we should somehow stop considering healthcare and especially education as social expenditures. They are really investments, and they pay a lot, including in economic terms. The other thing I wanted to mention is that the tax base can be enlarged by considering this problem of externalities I mentioned briefly, right? So we have a lot of behaviors that externalize cost on the rest of society. So this can serve as a tax base. Just to give you an example, which is somehow easy, but I think it's just an example among a large family of possible things. A carbon tax can be used, and the revenues from a carbon tax can be used not only to help the people who would suffer from higher energy prices, but also to fund, for instance, investment in emerging economies, investment in infrastructures, this sort of thing. So enlarging the tax base is not just about building up the income tax that you observe in developed countries, but also doing things that are not done enough in developed countries and can be done everywhere, which is to tax these various externalities that we observe especially in the economy. Yeah, I don't have much to say about diversity. I think we fully agree with you on that. And maybe Olivier could say more about that, and give some examples. But I think this is indeed something that can be very important in societies that, as Ximena was saying, are very polarized, and where it is important to really include people and make them part of the picture in the various institutions. So yes, we fully agree with that, and maybe we didn't insist on it enough including in the book, because we didn't. We were perhaps influenced a bit too much by countries which are not so polarized and not so diverse. Let me say something before leaving it to Olivier to complete about the media system. So that's indeed, when I say the common good, and in full agreement with Ximena, it's about avoiding government intrusion or interference that can be problematic, and avoiding private interest interference as well, right? But of course, we need to have some influence of the government, some influence of private interest, but all of that needs to be under control, right? So we need checks and balances. And so how to do that? I don't have a 1 second word to summarize the thing, but we have a full chapter on communication and the media in the big report that describes this in quite some detail. And this has to do with really building up safeguards, which can be part in the Constitution, part in the laws, the ordinary laws, and part in the building up of institutions that come from civil society and that are given an official role, right? That it can be recognized as having a role to play when there are some patterns of bad behavior in the media, or deviations or problems. So you need to have voices that are ready to be heard, and this has to be recognized somehow in some form of institutionalization of the process. So I wish I could say more about that, but indeed, I think it's a rather solid proposal, and it needs to be adapted to every local situation, of course, depending on the fabric of civil society that you have at the local level. Olivier, do you want to continue and perhaps talk also a bit more about the other question about participatory rights?
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Guillermo and Ximena, for the remarks and questions. Obviously, it's difficult to address this in very short, sentences, but let me pick up on the last one. I think it exemplifies a little bit the case that we showed earlier in one of the last slides, that for example, the media as a common good or a public good, non-rival, by the way, that's something that can be dealt with both at the three levels of constitutions, laws and regulations, to have like independent bodies, and outside independent control. These are, I would say, the three levels have to be, I would say, put in place and put in action in order to get, I would say, virtuous. It's not a problem also only between public investment and funding or private investment and funding. It's also about like regulations and external control and independence. And the UK has, I think, a long tradition of providing this type of external body based of professionals, civil society, and these bodies, independent bodies, are able to apply or implement the regulations, but also act as whistleblowers. And it comes back, Guillermo, to your question of control. And you 100% agree that beyond participation and inclusion, you need to give the people the instruments to provide some kind of control on the I would say on the inception of public decisions, but also on the assessment of the implementation and safeguarding, having the safeguards, say, to raise a red flag and saying, okay, it's not going in the right direction. And that's something that this control in terms of when we talk about media systems, the idea is not to say it should be better, it's best if it's public owned or government owned, or if it's private funded. I think what is important is to have the right regulations and to have the right independent bodies that can supervise the implementation of these regulations. So again, that's something of, I think, of great importance. Coming back to something about what you mentioned earlier on, Guillermo, on capitalism and emancipation, I think what we stressed in the presentation, and Marc on saying that we need to reform the mission and the governance of the corporation, that's, I think, this question of economic democracy, to put it that way, is extremely important to enhance democracy in corporations, all types of stakeholders. And I think it's extremely important because what we've seen is that more inclusive corporations produce less social and environmental externalities, negative externalities. So that's something that we really need to enhance, in a sense, because we're talking a lot about political democracy across the world, and we need to as we say, to deepen and to enhance the practice of democracy through more participation, more emancipation. But I think also economic democracy is extremely important, and you need to, this comes to this question of diversity, you need to have like different types of corporations or different types of economic associations to be able to have this type of diversity. It's not only a diversity of instruments of controls, it's also a diversity of actors in the society, not only at the economic level, but at all levels of, like, if you talk social, if you talk political, if you talk like about values and religions or worldviews, all these needs to introduce this notion of diversity. But in terms of, like, again, on this one way to reconcile emancipation and capitalism and to enhance and to make people responsible, involved in a transparent way in the governance of not only local or national institutions, but also economic institutions. And that's something that is extremely, I think, important to take into account, because when you have a diversity also of types of corporations, of type of economic associations, not all of them with the kind of restricted mission to maximize shareholder value. And we have worked quite a lot on the Scandinavian model and how it could be helpful, in a sense, with some adjustments, because again, I said in my introduction that there was no simple solution or one unique pathway to social progress. And the idea was not to say, well, look at Scandinavia, that's great, and we should do that everywhere in the world. That's not at all the idea. But there are some interesting features also in terms of diversity of corporations and diversity of modes of organization. And they are extremely inclusive and they are extremely efficient. And they are, as you know, very open economies. And so this means that you can have like highly open economies, highly innovative, but at the same time with inclusion, participation, and control given to stakeholders and citizens. And the final, maybe not to address Jimena's question, which is a fundamental one, because we see an increased polarization in societies, not only in politics, but in society. And how can you, in a sense, move forward and bring an agenda that would put these values and principles, and beyond that the instruments in place. And I think what we have no magic recipe, maybe to be kind of a delusion to the audience. We don't have like the magic recipe, but what we feel and that this will be, and I mentioned that very quickly at the end of my introduction, was a kind of a fluid coalition of actors. It is not governments or corporations or trade unions or the civil society as such that will, bring change forward. That will be, I think, on specific agendas those who are more focusing on inequalities, those who are more focusing on environmental degradation, those who are more focusing on participatory democracies. They will bring like corporations, foundations, associations, unions, political parties. We should not take them out of the picture. They will be still very important players. I think this will be, coalition of actors that will push forward some of the agenda, some kind of a progressist agenda on their, I would say, main cause. And the question will be, because we mentioned that these are interconnected challenges and the interconnected levels of challenges, the question will be how to organize these fluid coalition of actors, because they will be pushing on one type of agenda. But what we've seen as a maybe concluding message is that we started this work in 2014. Marc and I were in Paris at the Collège d'Études Mondiales, and I told you quickly we're discussing on why there are a lot of international panels on climate change, pollution, biodiversity, and nothing in societies. And what we've seen over the past 5 or 6 years, like the increasing understanding that these three challenges of inequalities, environment, and democracy are interrelated. When we started back in 2014, people were kind of addressing climate change, or we're talking about inequalities, or talking about democracy, but not so much as intertwined faces of the same problem, in a sense, or of societal problems. And now we've seen a sea change over the past 5 or 6 years. Now people, when they talk about introducing regulations or policies to control environmental degradation, they really have a look at how the decisions are taken. So to have a kind of more participatory process of decision, but also what will be the impact on inequalities. And that's something that was, Gilets jaunes, you have a kind of a yellow jersey, Guillermo. So, but it was the Gilets jaunes started with that, and so okay, it was introduction of a tax on fuel, and people say, well, it's exacerbating the inequalities we face, and this will deepen the divide. And people are saying, you do not take these decisions with having a kind of a consultation in place, and you don't look at the impact on inequalities. And that's something that we've seen over the past 5 or 6 years, a kind of not everywhere. And we see that there are progresses some places and setbacks in other places, but we've seen a more important understanding of the interconnection of these three levels. And the big question would be how to coordinate these coalition of actors, pushing more towards one aspect, but I think increasing the awareness that these challenges are interconnected. These coalition of actors, they tend to play a little bit more together now. Voilà.
I'm sorry, I was mute. I was saying that we have some questions, but one of them regards the degrees of cooperation, which somehow you kind of answered already. But the focus on the question is, again, in any case, I mean, how to, or what would you require, maybe as a very key element, whenever you have a country for cooperation between society's stakeholders, for instance, whenever you have a country in which there is really not a shared notion of a cooperative society. I mean, and we used to say, whenever, for instance, for entrepreneurial activities, we used to say, whenever you have losses, you are very cooperative, but as soon as you have profits, you become very individualist. And this very particular example somehow reflects, unfortunately, how our society is. So besides from what you already said, what would you think it's really a key element in order to foster this type of cooperation?
Yeah, maybe I can suggest something. So it has to do, the level of cooperation has to do also with the level of trust. And something that is interesting that we observe is that in many countries, I'm not quite sure about it, but trust in local institutions is generally much higher than trust in national institutions. And so proximity is something on which you can build something. And so when we are talking about these coalitions of actors, and when we are talking about civil society, what needs to be done is an investment in these things, right? So it's important. It's not as if we just have to sit back and wait until these things emerge. No, you need to invest in them. And so the example I gave about South Asia, where you have these informal sector workers being part of a global coalition, this was led by people who went there and invested in building up these groups, right? So it's not something that emerged spontaneously. They needed some help, some push. But once it is there, then they can take control. They can become the ones who play the thing. And so you have a serious problem, for instance, with the indigenous population in Chile, which is set apart and is not feeling included, and so on. And so some kind of investment like that can perhaps be done. And I'm sure there are already actors who play this role to really make it sure that these people have a voice and can be listened to, because they have something substantial to say. Another thing I want to mention is that sometimes cooperation comes from things you wouldn't expect. And so one example about a participatory mechanism, which is quite encouraging, is that when you start an assembly of citizens, when they are drawn by lot, right? So it's a random selection of citizens that is meant to be representative of the population. You put them together. So even if you have a very polarized society, when you put these people together and they spend some time together, they know one another and they start understand each other. And then things can happen. Their discussion can build a consensus and they can make valuable proposals. Of course, this does not replace deliberation at the whole society level, but it can really inspire people to trust that at least some of them have been part of this process and have come up with some ideas, some proposals for particular policy issues, and that's a good start for the discussion. So there have been some successful initiatives of this sort, which have ended up in referenda that have accepted the proposals of these groups. Sometimes it is less positive or less easy. But what I wanted to highlight is that somehow cooperation is something that you can engineer in the good sense of the word, right? You can really invest in groups that will build their voice, or you can invest in assemblies, in processes where people will start talking to one another and understand each other. Even in the US, there have been some experiments putting Democrats and Republicans who usually hate one another, but they become friends at the end, right? So they can start, and they don't agree on everything, but they can start understanding each other, and so presumably this is promising.
And if I may add on this, you can have cooperation. You can have cooperation at different levels of governance. And there was, for example, I don't know how much you're aware of the C40, the group of the consortium of the 40 largest cities in the world, and they're trying really to promote at their levels, because there are a lot that can be done at the city level, especially with large cities, including having their own regulations and sometimes promoting participatory democracy, enhancing environmental protection, trying to reduce, being more active in producing not only safety nets, but the intervention that would be kind of universal intervention for to reduce inequalities and enhance diversity. All these are, I think, interesting experiments. We don't hide I would say the conflicting dimension of this, because there are vested interests, there are conservative, there are people who have quite a lot, like corporations, institutions that will have to be reformed. And obviously we can expect from these institutions, entrenched institutions or vested interest or lobbyists, just to to refrain from having this movement towards participation, inclusion, and control. But that's something that we can experiment. And I 100% agree with Mark. We need to enhance and promote cooperation, and that's something that can be done not only at the very global level with the big Paris climate agreement and so on, but can be done at various levels of governance, local, business, regional, national, and this is something that needs to be put on the agenda and in the set of values and principles. That's something that all these so most of these values and principles enhance cooperation and enhance the development of an ethos that would be towards more, I would say, cooperation versus progress than competition for the few. So that's something that we need to nurture in a sense.
Yeah, I would like to react to one idea of enlarging the tax base that was mentioned by Mark. This idea of green taxes, for example. I believe that the Gilets jaunes, just precisely, it's a very good example of the limits of that. And I believe that we economists have been a little bit narrow in our analysis of the desirability, because in principle, yeah, we know for the externality argument that it's very reasonable to have it, but it seems that there is no. I mean, we all know that all kind of market failures can be fought either by some kind of taxes or subsidies, or for some form of regulation. And we have always dismissed regulation, not always, but at least in the last 20 or 30 years, regulation has been dismissed in favor of taxes. But it seems to me, looking at the Gilets jaunes reaction, for example, is that it would have been a bit more straightforward for the people that the real issue was not taxing them, but solving the climate change issue if you go straight for regulation rather than putting another tax. Because if you put another tax, I mean, the money may go anywhere, and the outcome in terms of climate change is a kind of second or third derivation of that. And I would like to raise this point to see what you think about that. And the other thing concerning the act local that was mentioned by Olivier, there is another issue which is very important, which is experimentation. It's very difficult to make experimentation at the national level, but it's much easier at the local level. And you may even have some kind of competition, different forms of addressing different problems, and that may, to some extent, give rise to a different approach, which was not thought by anyone, but came out of this sort of competition between local authorities trying to solve a given problem. That I believe it's very reasonable and interesting.
Maybe
yeah,
Mark,
so
on the second one.
First question. Yeah, okay.
Okay, but
first,
go ahead. Go ahead with the first, and I will do the second.
Yeah, exactly. Good. Yeah. Yeah. So on the tax base. So actually, what I think we should be thinking is in terms of packages of policies, right? So instead of having an environmental policy, whether it is tax or regulation, separate, or and on the side social policy. So we need to have a package that really coordinates the two things. And the problem with the Gilets jaunes in France was this total lack of coordination between the two spheres. And so it could have been regulation. It would have been exactly the same problem, right? The regulation could have been very harsh on the people. If you had, for instance, something that prevented people from using their diesel engines, their diesel cars, that would have been extremely harsh on them just as well. And so, in fact, there is now literature that is talking about the possibility to use these taxes on externalities for social purposes or for investment purposes. But you can really make sure, if you think of it as a package, that the distributional impacts and therefore the social acceptability are really well managed. And so that's why I think it's really worth thinking. So just to give you the example of the carbon tax, there is a conservative proposal in the US that is now being discussed almost everywhere in the world, which is to tax carbon at a level recommended by the usual expert groups, but redistribute the proceeds of this tax on a per capita basis to everybody in the society. And so if you do that, in most countries, I don't know about Chile what it would be like, but in most countries, the first two-thirds, the poorest two-thirds of society are net beneficiaries of this measure, right? So it's something that is great. It's only the richest of the richest who suffer from this package. And so I think that it's not so much about taxing versus regulation. It's about thinking in terms of the package. And indeed, we can have good packages, and if we do it smartly, we can build up welfare policies on the basis of externality management. Olivier?
Yeah, and Guillermo, quickly on your second question or point, in the report, in the big report, not in the short essay, but in the big report, we try to provide many examples of successful experimentations at lower levels of governance. And it's exactly our message, in a sense, that there are existing solutions. I already mentioned that in my introduction. There are existing solutions, there are alternatives, and then we just want to, make sure that people are aware that there are some very interesting experimentations in almost every corner of the world, and you should look at them and try to figure out whether it's suitable, the idea to your society. The idea is not to cut and paste something that worked in Bangladesh and say, well, it would work in Mexico, or do something that has worked in Norway and say, well, I just import it, cut and paste, because it will be lost, not in translation, but it will be lost in the translation in society. And that's something that, but still, even though you don't cut and paste these successful experimentations, we have many examples in the report on across the various chapters and the various parts of the report. The idea was to send a message that experimentations can inspire other experimentations that would be suitable and designed embedded in society. The idea is not to do like any kind of constructivism or kind of social engineering or societal engineering. The idea is to say, okay, there's a wide range of interesting experimentations that have been undertaken over the past quarter century, and this can inspire, this can be with some adaptations maybe embedded in society, and this is again part of the bottom up. The idea is to people to seize the toolbox. At some point we wanted at the end of the report to have a kind of a toolbox so people could actually build their own experimentation. And that's something that we've seen, like as you know, our country, France, is known for a very high degree of centralism. But what you've seen in the recent past is blossom some kind of participatory decision at the city level. And I already referred to that to you, Guillermo, when you were in Paris. The fact that, for example, in Paris now, it's 100 million euros a year of the budget investment of the city of Paris that is decided by the citoyens, the people from Paris. And every year, 250,000 people actually express interest and vote for different projects that would be, that they would consider more important for the city. And altogether, it has been more than 500 million euros. So this is only an experimentation at the city level, but that's something that can really bridge the gap and the divide and create trust in local institutions, because you can have participation, you can have inclusion, but also you have control, because then people can actually have a look at whether it was implemented or not. And that's something that, again, the idea is not to cut and paste one example here and to duplicate it somewhere else, but to be inspired and find how you can embed your own experimentation in your society.
Let me mention one experiment that I like very much. I'm not sure whether it is Bristol or Brighton, one of those British cities which has a Bristol pound or a Brighton pound, which is a local currency in order to enhance the local economy. That's an innovation. I don't know exactly when that started, but it's an interesting innovation in order to to keep resources within the city. I thought it was funny, at least.
It's in Bristol.
Is in Bristol?
Mm-hmm.
Very
Bristol pound. But there was a currency also issued in Nantes in the west of France with a local currency. And so all these are interesting experimentations that can be, transferred and adapted to the local conditions. But these are, I think, interesting ways of concretizing the power and the control of civil society, in a sense. And that's something that, because it should not remain abstract as well, there is the possibility of a control, or people have instruments, but then will they exercise them? I think it's a way to entice people to be more participatory, to be emancipated is a process. It's not something that we will declare at some point everybody emancipated. It's a kind of embodied and concept that you need to be emancipated to be declared, to have an emancipatory welfare state. So that's something that needs to be concretized in actions by the civil society and by citizens. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, I think we have already, well, almost 1.5 hours been discussing. I have many questions still, but I don't think we have time. I just would like to mention something. You didn't mention it here, but in order to provide people with instruments so they can exert this control, and so also they can deliberate appropriately, and so also in order to put different people from different disciplines to deliberate, to discuss things, and we know sometimes they have some kind of language different. I wanted to say that at the international statistician community, we usually say that statistics are at the heart of democracy, so, or at the service of democracy. And so we feel that these are the key inputs in order to speak the same language and to arrive to consensus and many things like that. I don't know if you have an opinion on that, or if you mention it on the book, for instance.
But I have a very quick, and I leave Marc conclude on this. But I think that like numbers are very important. Statistics are part of this number world. There was a famous sociology work of governing by numbers. But I think it's not only statistics. I would say these are the rules of the game that translate into numbers. Like it's what Marc referred to at some point. I think the accounting reform that we need to have, both at the private level and also in terms of national accounts, would be absolutely decisive. If we want to provide also the right incentives for, and also to be able to measure performance with internalizing some types of external some externalities, you need to have also the right rules for accounting, and this is something that we have been increasingly aware. I would say that in the rules and regulations and laws that you have to pass, even at the transnational level, this is something that statistics absolutely, but also I would say the accounting rules that make these that create some of the statistics and that are so, I say, crucial for measuring the performance of firms, but also societies. And that's something that there is a lot of work to be done. And I myself is working on more like private accounting and more inclusive accounting practices, and Marc is working more at the national account level. But these are crucial if we want to change the indicators of what we're doing, and give the right instruments for people to learn, practice, and assess these possibilities and these various set of opportunities that they have.
Yes, I fully agree with Olivier, and there needs to be an investment in conjunction of measures at the national level, so measuring social progress and well-being at the societal level, and measuring performance by various actors, and especially by private firms. So we need to invest in that. In the work we've done with the international panel, we haven't looked at these aspects very much, partly because we wanted to really invest more, study more of the transformations in institutions themselves and practices and norms. But of course, it was clear that changing measures was important, and also because there was a group working on the transformation of measures under the leadership of Joseph Stiglitz that was working at the same time, and so we didn't want to build on their domain. So we were waiting for their output. So I encourage you to have a look at what they have done. But of course, a lot remains to be done, especially in the direction of coordinating the reform of private accounting with the reform of private reporting, with the reform of national and global accounting.
Excellent.
Guillermo, would you like to say some final words?
No. I appreciate the very wise words and very rich number of contents and ideas that I'm sure will enrich our own debate. Thank you very much, Olivier and Marc.
Thank you very much,
Elena,
and Guillermo.
And good luck with all your work in Chile.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Feliz Navidad.